What is going on, Stallions? Today I'm going to show you the optimized graphics settings for Apex Legends, a game I have been playing a lot of here recently, and I've done an extensive amount of research digging into forums and watching several videos to get the optimized graphics settings for my exact rig. Now these settings will work for any GPU and CPU you have, as I am going to teach you what each one of these settings do, so you can kind of fine tune and tweak for your setup. And I'm going to show you guys a couple of sliders you can tweak to make those enemies really pop from the screen. Alrighty boys, it wouldn't be a game tutorial unless I shared my screen so you could actually see the game, so I am going to have a separate video going over all the non-graphical related settings, such as gameplay, mouse and keyboard, or if you are on controller, bindings for that, little tips, tricks, and tweaks to make sure that you're really knuckles deep inside a Wraith's portal, if you know what I mean. But today we're going to be spending our time inside of this warm, cozy video tab over here. So I highly recommend full screen. It is the least resource intensive, and if you are doing anything like streaming or screen recording with something like OBS or Streamlabs OBS, full screen seems to work best with game capture. Now, aspect ratio, I would leave this at 16:9. That's widescreen unless you have one of those fancy newfangled ultra wides, then you're gonna use that. Resolution, this should be the native resolution of your monitor. As you see, I am stunting, as the kids say, with a 1440 monitor. Now, if you're a big baller, a 4K top dog, you will obviously put it on that. Now, obviously, the perk of having a higher field of view is that you get more peripherals, obviously, but it's a little bit less accurate at mid to long range engagements, where basically a slight movement can make a huge difference not hitting the character model that you're aiming at, and we don't have time for that. Sprint, view, shake. Go ahead and make this minimal. By default, it's at normal. It is disorienting. It's gonna help you not miss your shots. Now, as for Vsync over here, this is kind of a mixed sack, a mixed bag, if you will. This game handles Vsync, G-Sync, and FreeSync quite a bit better than games like Black Ops Cold War and Warzone, where it's absolutely busted. You want to set a manual frame rate cap in lieu of using your monitor's native refresh rate, but we don't really have that option here. You can't really select a specific frame rate to target in Apex. You have adaptive resolution FPS target. That's not the same. This is a bunch of black magic trickery that you don't want them to polish your wand with. So what I would recommend doing, this is just me personally, is messing around in the firing range with it disabled and with it double buffered. Now, I wouldn't really go for triple buffed adaptive or adaptive half rate, but double buff seems to be just fine. And if you do run Vsync, you also want NVIDIA Reflex. Granted, you have an NVIDIA graphics card, 10, 20, or 30 series card, enabled with boost on, and this will counteract the input lag, which isn't really that noticeable. But if you are on a competitive level where you're literally bumping lines of G Fuel off your desk before each match, then you might notice that 0.03 seconds of that millisecond of input delay. You know, for a cash player like myself that, you know, basically jumps up and celebrates every time he gets a kill, this doesn't make a huge difference for me. But yeah, if you do run Vsync, also run NVIDIA Reflex with the boost on. Paul Walker, you want the boost on. Anti-aliasing, I would leave this on at TSAA. If you turn it off, it makes jagged edges look really bad, and it makes the edges of like buildings and mountains and everything just look really rough. Now, obviously I could crank this up to insane, as I have a 3080 in here. However, high seems to be the sweet spot where you're still getting some really pretty textures, but it's not going to be utilizing a bunch of your VRAM, a bunch of your video RAM, which is good because this does take a pretty substantial hit on your frames per second. And obviously, as this is a competitive first-person shooter, a BR, me personally and most players, they would want to prioritize your frames per second over sheer graphical fidelity. Now, anastrophic filtering, 4K or 4X seems to strike a fine balance. Obviously, I could crank this up to 16, but again, this does make a slight hit to your frames per second. And honestly, the difference between 4 times 8 and 16 isn't that heavy. When you start getting down here by like bilinear, trilinear, I know a lot of people run bilinear, but to me it looks quite atrocious. Just play around with it a little bit, but for me, top dead center here, 4X works pretty good. Now this substantially reduces load on your GPU, ambient occlusion, which I also do have to say will increase visibility too. When people are popping smoke, like for example Bangalore, or there's explosions going off, this is going to make it to where you can actually see enemies quite a bit easier. I've noticed a pretty substantial difference. since I have turned this from high to disabled. All right, so moving right along, this is probably the most important part of this tutorial, to be 110% honest, and so important I'm actually going to zoom in so you can look me right in the brown eye, right in the pink eye. So all of the lighting effects in Apex Legends, not only, they don't make a huge, tremendous difference to your frames per second, they're not very resource intensive, but they don't look good. They don't make the game look any prettier, which is crazy because you're thinking like, oh, the shadows are going to look all whack and whatnot. No, it looks beautiful still. But what they will do is give you better visibility on enemies. So I'm going to have some pictures on screen here to kind of solidify or back up my statements here. But basically, all of these, turn them on low. Spot shadow, disable. This is disorienting and it distracts you from enemies and they don't look good. And the bonus, the cherry on the old cream pie cake, is that it actually gives you higher frames per second, and you would have these disabled anyway because they're absolutely hideous. Now, down here, this is all dependent on your GPU pretty much. So, again, you know, I might have flexed earlier quite subtly that I have a 3080 or whatever, but, you know, if you guys have 2060 Super, 1080 Ti even, you'll probably be able to have these pretty much at high or medium. For me, I can have all these at high, and I'm steadily at 144 frames per second, so that is quite good. But again, I would prioritize frames per second over sheer graphical fidelity and beauty. You know what I mean? I get all the beauty I need from staring into Wraith's portal, so I don't need to worry about that too much. And that, boys, I think is really all there is to it. Hopefully this video was beneficial for you guys. Again, these are the settings that I have been using for quite some time now. At least since I got this PC. They were slightly bumped down, obviously, when I have my 2060 Super. And that's something you have to keep in mind. Obviously, you want to know your rig, your components, your CPU, GPU, and RAM. Shoot, maybe even your MOBO. Now, that doesn't really have anything to do with this, but you're going to want to know what you have in your system, and obviously you're going to have to fine-tune a little bit. You might need to tweak. You might need to drop some of these settings to make sure that you are hitting the maximum, your native refresh rate for your monitor. Now, if it's only a 60 hertz refresh rate monitor, then that's not really that big of a deal. And I say this all the time when I do these tutorials for in-game settings and whatnot. It doesn't really matter how high you can get your frame rate on screen, like, you know, with the little FPS counter, if your monitor doesn't have the native refresh rate, for one, and two, you want to make sure that you go into the Windows 10 settings and make sure that you actually have your monitor set. You right click. Shoot, I'll show you guys right now. What am I doing with my life? You're going to right click. You're going to go to display settings over here. I have 3 monitors here, but this is just the only one I really care about having a high frame rate, is my primary gaming monitor. You're going to come down here to advanced display settings and refresh rate. By default, every time you plug in a new monitor, sometimes when your PC loses power completely, sometimes it just defaults itself to 60 hertz. And you could have a 269 refresh rate monitor, and it's going to default to 60. So come in here and set your highest refresh rate. That'll save you a whole hootin' and a hollerin'. And that is going to do it, guys. If you enjoyed this video, liking it helps it to get seen by more people, which in turn helps my little channel to grow, which I greatly, greatly appreciate. Subscribe for more content like this. I do a lot of news in the gaming community and industry, as well as tutorials helping you get set up, streaming and YouTubing, and I will see you, like you specifically, in the next video. Peace.